You're listening to the OCD Stories podcast, hosted by me, Stuart Ralph. The OCD Stories is a podcast dedicated to raising awareness and understanding around obsessive-compulsive symptoms. I do this through interviewing inspired therapists, psychologists, and people who have experienced OCD. Welcome to the OCD Stories. And welcome to episode 450 of the podcast. And in this one, I got on Carrie, who has kindly agreed to share her OCD story with us. In particular, we discuss intrusive thoughts, religious-themed OCD, POCD, suicidal thoughts, postpartum OCD, getting therapy, doing exposure and response prevention therapy, going to intensive outpatient therapy, shame, self-compassion, mindfulness, words of hope, and much more. And thank you to NoCD for supporting the podcast. NoCD offers effective and convenient therapy available in the US and outside the US. To find out more about NoCD, their therapy plans, if they currently take your insurance, or to download their free app, head to go.treatmyocd.com/the OCD stories, or the link will be in the episode description. Thank you to all of our patrons for supporting our work. To sign up to our Patreon and to check out the other benefits you'll receive as a patron, please see the link in the show notes. So thank you to Carrie for her time. It was really great to talk to her and hear her story. And of course, thank you to you guys for listening. As always, it means a lot. And without further ado, here is Carrie. Welcome to the show, Carrie.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Yeah, it's good to have you on. And I'd love to hear your OCD story in as little as much detail as you want to give.
Okay, great. Yeah, so first, just a little bit about myself. So I live in Texas with my husband and my 2.5-year-old daughter. And I have a really great life. I work for a nonprofit animal welfare organization. My husband's a firefighter, really close with my family. My parents live like 2 miles away, so they are able to help with my daughter a lot. And really close with my sister. But about 2.5 years ago, when I gave birth to my daughter, before I even left the hospital, I started to have some really strong, it really started with like feelings, some really strong feelings, and just kind of feelings of like despair and hopelessness. And I didn't really know where they were coming from at first. I mean, of course, a new mom, I was very aware of, the possibilities that could happen postpartum. And, we hear the term baby blues a lot. Figured it was something related to that. But then as I started to really notice those feelings like more and more, they started to seem really familiar to me. And I had been battling off and on with OCD for it's been 25 years now. The first time I experienced it was when I was 13. But of course, for the first probably like 15, almost 20 years, I didn't even know it was OCD. I think a lot of us have a similar story. So as soon as I kind of pinpoint the feelings, and it reminded me of, other times when I had like really bad intrusive thoughts, then of course that's when my mind started to go towards those intrusive thoughts. And it all was related to this like huge fear of hurting and harming my daughter. So by the time we got home, I was in the hospital for 4 days. I had a C-section, so we had to stay there a little bit longer. But by the time we got home, I was just like, I had already spiraled and was in it. And, I was ruminating a lot. I was doing all the things that now I know, only make it worse. I was trying to like stop the thoughts, first of all, and, try to like distract myself. And, but yeah, before I go a lot into that journey, because I finally did get treatment after that. I want to go back to when it first came on, when I was 13. So I can kind of share like that history leading up to this time after having my daughter. So when I was 13, it was like the summer before my freshman year of high school. I was spending a lot of time at my mom's daycare. She was a daycare director, and I helped in the classrooms during my summer break. The teachers loved me, because they had free help. And my mom had asked me to help in this one specific room, the 4-year-old room, because they were short-staffed. And the teacher that they had in there, her husband was a priest, so she was very religious. And the daycare was actually through a church. We weren't like super religious, but because my mom was the director of that daycare, we still went to church all the time and like participated in all the things. So, I was familiar. But I was spending a lot of time with this one teacher who was very religious. And, I enjoyed my time with her, but she had a lot of really strong opinions about things. And shortly after that, I woke up one morning, like super early. I remember it was still pretty dark outside. My parents were still sleeping, and I was just bombarded with these thoughts and fears of my dad not going to heaven. And because my dad never went to church with us or anything, and it was nothing that I had been concerned about before, but for whatever reason, that thought got stuck. And I remember, like, I got out of bed. I was very anxious, which at the time I didn't even know that's what that feeling was. And I even went outside and like walked around. I took a Bible and I was like trying to read through the Bible to find a reason why my dad would go to heaven. Trying to find like, I think, reassurance. And that that was the start of it, basically. And for a few days after that, I know I talked to my mom about those concerns, and she gave me a lot of reassurance. And but I don't think I really expressed to her like how severe these thoughts were and like what an impact they were having on me. And it started to kind of twist, and then the thoughts turned into concerns of myself going to heaven, whether or not I would. And then I started to think about all the reasons why maybe I wouldn't go to heaven. And so all the bad things, mistakes I've made, maybe bad things that I've thought. And I went into like just full blown, anxiety. Like I remember I was like sitting on the floor, just sobbing. It was in the evening. My mom was home and she was trying to console me. I had no idea what was happening. And my brain, like I remember very vividly that my brain seemed to like, it was searching, like hardcore searching for something else to latch onto. Like, and that's why I was crying so much, was because every single bad thought I had ever had was like going through my brain all at once. And it immediately latched on to this thought that I had had several weeks before when I was babysitting. So I had lots of babysitting jobs at the time. My mom was the daycare director at a huge daycare. Everyone, wanted me to babysit their kids. And it was actually at another minister's house that I was babysitting. And, I loved their kids, and I had put them down for bed. And I had this thought of just random thought, what if I'm a pedophile? And I remember as quickly as that thought came into my mind, it went out. I even remember saying like, oh, I would never do that. That was weird. And then it left, and that was fine. But, in that moment of this like onset of what I know now as OCD, I remembered that I had that at one time, and it immediately got stuck in my head. And that is something that, I battled with for, up until now, that, really changed the course of my life. So once that happened, I changed, everything that I was doing. I stopped going to my mom's daycare. I stopped babysitting. I had a lot of parents upset with me. They didn't understand like why all of a sudden, I'd make up excuses like why I couldn't. But that one thought just spiraled into other, really intrusive and scary thoughts. And it was all linked to this fear of me, being, what if I was a pedophile and I just didn't know it? And it, rocked my world. And I went the entire summer. I was severely depressed. I stopped eating. I wasn't sleeping. I would kind of talk to my parents about it, but I could never share that. Even though I had a great relationship with my mom, it was like, that was like the one thing, right? Like that I could never tell her. Like, she loves kids. This was her profession. Like, what if her child was a pedophile? Like, how horrible that would be for her. And so I didn't tell her. I would just tell them that I was depressed and that I was really scared something bad was going to happen, was like the only way I would really verbalize it to them. So I ended up, as like things progressed, I was severely depressed because of all of this. Like, it completely changed who I thought I was. And so I started having suicidal thoughts. I felt like that was the only way to make this end, and that was the best thing that I could do for other people too. Like, I shouldn't be here. I'm not a good person. Like, I had all those thoughts. And yeah, I won't go into like detail because I don't want to trigger anyone. But I came really close to committing suicide. Thankfully, it didn't, I didn't. But it was mostly around like fear of like, well, what if it doesn't work? And, and then everyone will find out that I tried. So, I almost did like several times, like had everything prepared, and then I would never go through with it. So I started high school, went to, I had been there like a week, had started back to school. It was awful. I could not focus at all. I had always been a really good student. But all I could think about was, these terrible thoughts and then wanting, to end my life. So I finally broke down to my mom and told her that I was contemplating suicide. And, she went into mom mode immediately and got me, pulled me out of school, got me into therapy, tried all the things, but I mean, they couldn't help me because I was never honest with them. So, I was in like talk therapy, and I would just lie about why I was depressed. Because again, I just never felt like I could tell anyone truly like those thoughts that I was having. And eventually it just faded. And I think that I actually started my period for the first time. Like, I was pretty late to starting, but within weeks of that, like, the thoughts faded. So I kind of thought, man, I wonder if that was all just like some crazy hormone thing that happened, So I went rest of high school. I was awful. Like, I think I just still had like a lot of self-hatred and self-loathing, even though the thoughts had kind of faded. Like, they were still always in the very back of my mind, and I had a ton of guilt and shame. So, I got into did a lot of drugs, drank a lot, partied a lot, skipped a lot of school. When I was 17, I had kind of like a relapse of, OCD, where I got hit with all those intrusive thoughts again. And it was because I started a new birth control. It was an injection that lasted 3 months. And I mean, within like a couple of weeks of getting that done, I got hit. So again, I kind of thought, okay, so it definitely is like something to do with hormones, if they're off in any way. But I went through, like, every time I would have these relapses, it would be the exact same pattern. I'd get hit with the intrusive thoughts. It's, that subtype, the OCD, that's what I always got stuck with. And then I would eventually go into like depression and suicidal thoughts, because, I would just not feel like there was any way out, and then eventually it would fade and I would come out of it. So it would usually last like a few months every time. But those few months were hell.
Horrible.
And then, I think I had just like a ton of trauma afterwards too, related to it, because I never got any help. So when I was 17, I did go see a doctor to get on medication, after my parents really encouraged me to consider that. Because again, I just was telling them I was depressed. And sure, the doctor wrote me a prescription, I think maybe for Zoloft, but I never actually took it, because then I got really scared. Well, what if I start the medication and it helps with the depression part, and then I start acting on the thoughts that I'm having. Like, again, it's just like this anxiety thing of like, I just had this huge fear of like, of me doing something. And I was worried that some sort of medication would, have an impact on my, like, whatever part of me was preventing me from doing these things.
Yeah.
So I never even filled the prescription. And this whole time too, like, I didn't even know what anxiety was. Like, depression was really the only like term that I was super familiar with. So that's why that's what I would just tell people. Yeah. So then, it happened again when I was about 21. Again, it was like a birth control related. Like, I had, switched to a different birth control. And then again, when I was around like 24, so kind of like every 3 to 4 years, I would have this onset. And that time when I was around 24, I actually started doing some research, like Googling at that point. I think I started with like unwanted thoughts, like Googling that, and I eventually found some forum. I can't even remember like what website it was on, and someone was describing intrusive thoughts that they were having about harming people, and that they were even scared to like hold a knife. And I was like, man, like I've had those same fears. Like, so, now that I'm much more knowledgeable about OCD, like I can think back to like other subtypes that I probably, I had kind of throughout my life. I just they never really tortured me like the POCD did. So I, for whatever reason, like they would stick with me for like maybe a day or two, but then they would fade away. So I've had similar harm, like OCD, being like having thoughts and like being scared to like be in a room alone with someone for whatever reason, scared that I was going to hurt them. So that was the first time though, because when that form that I was reading, someone was talking about, it was OCD. So that was the first time that I could really put like a term, like a possible diagnosis on what I was experiencing. And at the time, I was actually seeing a therapist. She wasn't specialized in OCD or anything, but, so we just did a lot of talk therapy. She taught me a lot of like different tools and like exercises to do to help with anxiety, which now I know was probably exasperating it for me. But I mean, she was a lovely person. But she just didn't know anything about OCD. And I did tell her about these things that I had read, and I thought maybe that's what I had. And she was like, yeah, it definitely could be. But again, then the thoughts kind of faded, and I just, I kind of spent this whole time trying as hard as I could to just ignore it as well. So after that, though, I did not mess with my birth control at all. I was terrified of my hormones getting screwed up in any way. I met my now husband, and we, at the time we were living in Utah, we worked at an animal sanctuary in Utah, and we ended up moving back to Texas, where I'm originally from, because we knew we wanted to be near family. Like, we knew at some point we were going to start our own family, which was scary to me because of these thoughts that I knew that I had dealt with. But, when I'm not like full blown, like in OCD, I can kind of, things are a little more clearer, and that it, really high anxiety isn't there. So, and I knew, like, I loved kids. Like, since I was a kid, I knew I wanted to be a mom. Like, but I definitely had, like, before I met my husband, I kind of had thought, like, well, I can never have kids. Like, I'll never be able to do that. Like, because, I'm not worthy. So anyways, we ended up moving back to Texas, got married, started talking. By then I was 35. So, we knew we wanted to get started soon on having a family. And I had told my husband that I had OCD, that I had never been like formally diagnosed. And he had asked me a little bit about it, but I was so good at like avoiding the conversation and not actually being truthful. So I would just be like, yeah, I would just get these really intense thoughts, and they would, scare me. And anyway, so after we got married and we wanted to start having kids, the first thing I needed to do was go off birth control, which was quite terrifying to me. So I met with an OCD specialist in the Austin area. I did like a virtual. This was like right after COVID. Or I think we were still like kind of in the pandemic. So I did a virtual with her, kind of told her my story, told her that I was going to be going off birth control, and I was really scared if I did that, like, my OCD would come back. And so I wanted to get like a jump start on things, like, to prevent it from coming back. So she started talking to me about ERP, exposure response therapy, and how that was the gold standard for treatment. And that that would be something, that we would work on. And she started to ask me, like, what were the thoughts, like the intrusive thoughts. And I was like, oh, well, I don't want to talk about that. I don't want to tell you that. And she's like, well, kind of need to know a little more information to be able to help you. And I was like, oh no, well, like, can't we just do like the treatment without me telling you? And she's like, you're gonna have to tell me. And then she explained ERP a lot more too. And so I started to grasp like what that meant and realize, oh my God, I'm gonna have to tell someone Like, I'm going to have to tell her, and I can't. Like, that was so scary and terrifying to me. So I never saw her again. Like, I was like, I'm not doing that. I'll just risk it. Like, I'll see what happens. So I went off birth control and it's totally fine. I immediately got pregnant, had a great pregnancy, like there were 2 days while I was pregnant where I had an intrusive thought similar, like related to POCD. And I remember I freaked out. And I was like crying, and I was like, oh no, here it is, here it is. Like, I was like bracing. And then it just kind of faded away. And then, the rest of pregnancy was great. Had my baby, healthy, everything I could ask for. And then, we're back to where I started. Like, I'm in the hospital, and then I get hit with, I swear it was just the feelings. Like, it wasn't even a specific thought. It was just the feelings that reminded me of feelings that I had when I would be like in a true, like, OCD like episode. So I fought it for a while. Once we got home with my baby, it's also crazy because, like, I just had a surgery, I just had a C-section. I was so sleep deprived. And I'm trying to, like, figure out how to keep this tiny human alive that I'm also terrified that I'm going to hurt. And it was a really horrible, like, awful time for me, because all I wanted was to be like the best mom that I could. And I also wanted to really enjoy that time with her. Like, I had all these visions, of what that time would be like. And that was not what I was experiencing, like, I knew it would be tough, having a newborn, but I also didn't know that I would be like crying all the time and be, falling apart. So I started to do research, like, and I was more open with my husband, like, again, did not tell him the specific thoughts that I was having, but he knew that I was struggling. He was really worried about me. And, he was trying to do everything he could. But it's like, I couldn't even sleep. Like, when they always tell you, like, sleep when the baby's sleeping. Like, my mom kept telling me that, and I'm like, I can't. Like, if I lay down, I get like, I'm just like being tortured with thoughts. Like, I couldn't even just like relax and watch a TV show with my husband. Like, that was awful to me. Like, because any type moment of quiet was like just torture. Because that's when my brain was like, ooh, yay, we can think about all these things now. So I started to do research, and I just wanted to treat myself because I didn't want anyone to know, like, the thoughts that I was having. So I started to, like, read some different blogs. I came across some different podcasts, including this podcast. And then I started to be a compulsion for me, not just your podcast, but like the research of OCD. And I was on a quest to find someone who basically had my exact same story. Like, that, to me, that was what I wanted to find, because that was going to give me hope that, okay, I'm not a pedophile. Like, I'm not, like, I just wanted to find someone. So even like when I would hear stories that were similar to mine, like they even had the same, subtype, or maybe it came on like after they had a baby, it was still never, no one's going to have the exact same story as me. So it would help for a little bit, and then, it would wear off. And then I would be right back at it. Like, I spent every moment that I wasn't taking care of my baby, it was me researching, just like obsessively. So, and then, and that only, it just made it worse and worse and worse. And I mean, I swear I couldn't even go a minute. Like I couldn't even have 1 minute break where I wasn't like having the thoughts and like ruminating. So then, like what always happened in the past, I started having suicidal thoughts. And I felt like that was the best thing that I could do for my baby and my husband was to leave, and not be here. And which is so sad now that I think back to that. And then I get emotional because I really worry about like other women that are in my position that don't have, they don't have the privilege to even, maybe have access to be able to do research to like self-diagnose, and figure out what, like they aren't even aware of OCD. Or if they are, they don't have the means to get help. And that is something that I want to talk a little bit about, because it's something that really bothers me. So I had my checkup with my gynecologist, I think when my daughter was a few weeks old, and they have you actually fill out a form that they're checking for like to see if you have any, postpartum depression or anything like that. And I was completely honest on that form. And I think they even had a question, like if you're having suicidal thoughts. And I said yes. And I'm guessing my doctor never even looked at it because you do it like, when you're in the waiting room or whatever, and then you like hand it over to the nurse or something, because no one brought it up like during my checkup. No one. And I'm not gonna, again, I'm great at avoiding the conversation, so I'm not gonna bring it up. So that is one huge failure on women, or anyone dealing with mental health. And then the next time I had my checkup, then I was, because I was even worse at that point, and I told them I was struggling and I had OCD. I know this is OCD, like I need help. And they actually we were in Houston at the time. They have like amazing, medical facilities there. And so they actually had like a postpartum depression, OCD, clinic, like mental health clinic attached to that hospital. So my doctor referred me to them, and they called me, and they couldn't get me in right now. This was like towards the end of April, and the soonest they thought that they could get me in was like July 31st. So it was going to be 3 months. And I'm no, immediately what I was thinking was like, I don't even know if I'm going to be alive in 3 months. Like that, this is an emergency. So I talked to my husband a lot about it. Once I started having the suicidal thoughts, I tried to keep it to myself for a while. But I ended up breaking down and telling him, and it was really hard on him. He was really scared, and sorry,
Nice.
try not to cry. But he's amazing. And he called my mom. My husband, like I said, he's a firefighter, so he was going back to work, and he works 48-hour shifts. So, and we were at this time, we had relocated to Houston while I was pregnant for my job. And we knew we needed to get back to the Austin area where my family is so we could have better support and help, but we couldn't do that immediately. However, like when we had relocated to Houston, my husband ended up keeping his original firefighter job in the Austin area. and was just commuting back and forth because he would work 48-hour shifts and then have 4 days off. So the commute would suck, but he wasn't having to do it every day. But what he would do is he would leave the day before, because like his shift started at 7 a.m. So he would leave the day like the afternoon before that and stay at my sister's house so that he wasn't having to get up at like 3 or 4 in the morning. So that meant he would be gone for 3 nights, and 2.5 days that I would be alone with my daughter. And that was the most terrifying thing to me, because I had gotten really good at like avoiding situations like bath time, diaper changes, like all those situations where the thoughts had a lot of opportunity to go crazy. Like I would avoid them as much as I could. And I knew him going back to work, I wasn't going to be able to. And I just really didn't know that I would survive. So after like sharing with my husband, he contacted my mom, and they worked out a schedule. So my mom would basically trade with him. Like she would come to Houston, stay with me for those days that he was at work, and then he would be home with me. And so that was a lot on my family. And that, I have a lot of issues with like guilt and causing like stress on other people. So, that was a whole nother thing. But we all knew that wasn't going to be like, that couldn't be a long-term solution. So we also started to look into other OCD therapists outside of, my hospital, since it was going to take them 3 months to get me in. I met with one therapist who wasn't an OCD specialist. And the first thing she said to me, it was like virtual, was if you're having any thoughts of hurting yourself or children, I will have to report you. Like she said it in a more like professional way or whatever, but that was basically like her intro. And so I was like, okay, well, I'm not going to tell you anything then. Yeah. So never met with her again. And then I was like, I need to see like someone who specializes in OCD. So I saw a couple of different people, and then my husband pointed out that that actually was one of my compulsions too, was trying to find like the perfect therapist. And then I tried in OCD, and that went well. The therapist that I got matched with, she was a new mom too. She had like her daughter, I think, was like 5 months old. But I was so broken then. I mean, I would just spend most of our time together just crying. And, she had me, like, she was starting me on exposures and everything. But, I think I was meeting with her maybe twice a week, but it wasn't enough. And, the other thing that I was struggling with too was I thought if I got help, if I did what I needed to do, the thoughts would go away. And being told like, that's not the point. Like the thoughts will still, like, you'll still have the thoughts. It's just, they won't like affect you as much. That I really struggled with that too, because I thought my entire life, I had thought, because I was having the thoughts, like that made me a bad person. So that was something else that like was hard for me to accept, I guess, was that there was this possibility that I could still have the thoughts even after going through like all the treatment. So then we realized we're in Houston, and there's this really amazing OCD institute there in Houston, McLean. That's very, it's very expensive as well. But my husband, being the great man that he is, he had a lot of money in savings he had actually had like a an accident when he was a kid, and they had gotten a big like insurance settlement because he had been really injured as a child. And so he had got these like settlements once he was an adult that he had been putting away in savings. So again, we were just very fortunate, and I know most people aren't, that he used that money so that I could enroll in like the outpatient program at McLean. So I could go there every day, like Monday through Friday, and then still come home to my baby in the evening. So I started that when my daughter was 3 months old. And they helped find the appropriate medication to get onto to kind of like take that edge off, which I needed. So that we could really actually start like the exposure therapy. And so we started, doing, and I mean, that was awful too. I mean, I think like the first thing they had me do was color a picture that I think it said like maybe like molester or like incest or something like that on it. And I was so uncomfortable. They had me like write some scripts and and then we started going into like doing more things like with my daughter that I was avoiding. So like the diaper changes, I started doing all the diaper changes. I would like make my husband be in the room with me. And then slowly I would have him like, okay, step out of the room. Like, okay. And all of this too, I should share like what I finally told my husband too, because I think like all of this is related to so much shame, is what prevented me from telling anyone for so long. Like when I think back to it, so I was like, I held back a lot from telling people. I was finally honest with someone, the first OCD specialist that I saw, like, once we finally found someone, after having my daughter, she was the first person that I actually told like what my thoughts were. And that was so scary. And then, and then after that, I had to do it so many times, because then like I started at no CD and then at McLean. When I was with no CD, one of the ERPs that she wanted me to do was to tell my husband. And so I sat him down one night and cried and cried and cried and told him. And what I expected and what I was totally prepared for was for him to pack up my daughter and leave. And I honestly kind of wanted him to, right? As much as I love my daughter, more than anything, like I did still think like that is probably the best thing for her. Get her away from me. Like I shouldn't, like I don't deserve to be a mom to her. Like you need to keep her safe. Like, and I told him and he listened, and then he asked, is it okay if I say something? And then he talked and he cried. And I mean, he was just so supportive though, and like never once questioned like anything. And I that's just amazing to me, because like I don't know if I would have been that understanding and supportive, like if I didn't know anything about OCD and someone was telling me that they were having those thoughts, like but he knows me really well, and he trusts me, and he always says like, that I was like, he's like, that even on your worst day, you're the best thing for our daughter. So yeah, having to tell people was really hard. And even doing this podcast is like, kind of an opportunity for some ERP for me, because up until then, I had thought that I would never, ever tell anyone about these thoughts. Like, I would die before ever telling anyone. And I feel very fortunate that, I have found a space, and I have found, other people, and, a community, that I now feel comfortable to be able to like tell my story.
Yeah.
And yeah, the last thing that I'll say is, I think the whole community thing is just so important. So when I was with No CD, I had enrolled, and they have a moms group, moms with OCD, and I continued to go like to those. They would do like weekly calls in the evening, and it was just a support group. And I continued to go to those once I had enrolled in McLean too. And that was like some of the best and most like just supportive calls that's what I really needed during that time, was to hear from other moms that had, similar thoughts, and, no judgment, like, free judgment, no judgment zone. And so that was really like throughout my treatment time, that was something that was really helpful for me. But yeah, it was a long road. It probably took me like 6 months to really get to the point where I felt comfortable being alone with my daughter. I obviously was alone with her like a lot during those like 6 months, but as far as like getting to the point where my anxiety was, more manageable and everything. Now she's 2.5, and I can't imagine, not being her mom, not being here. Like, she does need me. And yeah.
Wow. What a journey. Yeah, thank you so much for sharing it, and so being so vulnerable and sharing so much detail. It's impressive to see how openly and calmly you can talk about it, given at one point you were hiding it from every single person, including professionals. So that's a real testament to the work you've put in, and the therapy and the journey you've been on. And so what I mean, you've done such a good job of explaining your story. I don't actually have too many questions about your story. What else do you do aside from obviously medication, therapy? What else helps you just with like your general mental well-being and staying on top of it?
Yeah, I had to do a lot of self-compassion work. Since I had for so long had just kind of hated myself, and had convinced myself like that I was a bad person, and then that I was a bad mom. And so that was something that we identified pretty quickly. Well, my therapist identified pretty quickly, that was something that I really needed to work on. So I did get the OCD self-compassion like workbook and work through that. And they at McLean, they would have me like write like kind of like words of affirmation, on Post-its, and like hang it on my mirror. And then one of the things that I picked up from that book was starting to talk to myself. What they suggested was like picking a person that has like really been kind to you, and that you feel really safe with, and when you're struggling, is like, what would that person say to you, and how would they say it, and like what would their voice sound like. So I chose one of my grandmothers, who was just like the most kind, lovely woman. And so I would think about her a lot, like when I was having a hard time, and things that she would have said to me. And, I would say it in my head with like her voice. And I also did a lot of, a lot of my homework was like self-care stuff, honestly. Like, they would want me to, take like, have your husband take the baby, like you take a nice bath, like, do something for yourself. And a lot of that was related to me just being a new mom too. And then I also did a lot of like mindfulness work as well. That really helped kind of ground me. So when I'd be with my daughter alone, like if I was struggling a lot, the mindfulness work really helped as well.
Yeah, that's really good. And the self-compassion for OCD workbook, is that Kimberly Quinlan's
Yes.
workbook? Cool.
Yes, that is
Nice.
correct. Yeah.
All right, awesome. And I guess just words of hope for anyone listening, or any mums or parents listening, that are maybe going through similar to what you went through.
Yeah. It, as sappy as it sounds, like, and I heard this while I was in it too, and it's really hard to believe it. But it does get better. The more, find your people that you feel safe with to talk to about these things. In a way, like my husband did read a lot and was very careful not to give me reassurance. Like once I did tell him, and, I was going through treatment, so finding your people that you feel safe with to talk to about it, that are also, knowledgeable about OCD, so that they aren't giving you a bunch of reassurance. And just being like gentle with yourself. And the process, it does work. Like if you keep up with it. And there were definitely moments where I had some pretty like severe breakdowns at McLean. I'm pretty sure I like traumatized one of the interns at one point, who was just trying to ask me a simple question, and I somehow turned it into like how I was a monster. And but I had moments where it didn't feel like I was on the right track, but it was part of the journey. And so, yeah, I would just like find your people, find a way to love yourself, and believe in the treatment, and, continue to like move forward with that as much as you can.
Yeah, I like that. Good words. And let's say you've got a billboard in Texas. What do you want written on that billboard?
Yeah, I would say, or I'd have written, your thoughts do not define you.
Yeah, nice. And then let's say you can pick up the phone and call the 20-year-old you. No, let's stop that. Pick up the phone and call the 13-year-old you, that version of you that first started getting those intrusive thoughts. What would you tell her?
Yeah, if I know it's a phone call, if I could be there in person, I would love to give her a hug.
Yeah.
But I would tell her that you were strong and you were braver than you know. And this is really hard right now, and this is going to be the hardest thing that you go through. You will get through it, and there is light at the end of the tunnel, and you will eventually have the life that you always dreamed of.
Nice.
And if I could tell her that, that to look up OCD, so she could get treatment sooner. Like I said, it took me over 20 years.
Yeah, which sadly isn't that uncommon. Yeah. Yeah. Okay, thank you so much. And lastly, is there anything else you wish you could have said or shared today?
Yeah, there was one other thing that I wanted to mention that was kind of like an aha moment for me in my treatment. I was going to McLean and, still having a hard time, but we were about to take a little vacation to the beach for my birthday. And my therapist really wanted me to, take that time to like unwind and, enjoy like my family and everything. And it had always been a dream of me to, once I had a baby, I couldn't wait to take her to the beach. So I decided before we left that, I was like, once we get there, I'm just gonna focus on each day and just trying, to be really present, like in each moment of that day, and stop and don't during that time. I'm not going to worry about tomorrow or in a year from now, what's going to happen, any of that. I'm just going to focus on that day. And that, it's part of that like mindfulness work too, but that really helped me. And I ended up like, when I came back, I ended up continuing to do that, as much as I could throughout. And it really helped with, because I was focusing so much on like concerns of, interactions that I could have with my daughter, years from now that just weren't helpful. So, again, it's kind of cheesy, like, just take every one moment at a time, but it really worked for me. It really it made a big difference.
Yeah. OCD doesn't really exist in the here and now. It's in the future, in the past. Yeah. Okay, look, thank you so much. Really enjoyed your story, and I'm sure it's helped a lot of people and parents too. So yeah, thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you, Stu.
Thank you for listening to this week's podcast. And thank you to our Patreons who helped make this episode possible. And if you would like to find out more about Patreon and the rewards and benefits, then there will be a link in the episode description. If you enjoy the OCD Stories podcast and would like to support us, please subscribe and rate the show wherever you listen to the podcast. And thank you to NoCD for supporting our work. And if you want to find out more about NoCD, head to go.treatmyocd.com/the OCD Stories or click the link in the episode description. And quick disclaimer, guys, this podcast is not therapy. It is not a replacement for therapy. Please seek treatment from a trained professional. And until we speak, take care.